I never imagined life could turn this quickly from bliss to betrayal. Back then, everything seemed perfect. I had my dream job, my best friend by my side, and Victoria, the woman I thought, was my soulmate, smiling at me as if the world belonged to us alone. I remember the morning like it was yesterday. The sunlight poured through my apartment window, painting the walls golden. I had just closed a major deal that could change everything for my startup. Jack, my friend since college, was there, grinning as if he'd just won the lottery himself. Victoria was buzzing with excitement, hugging me, her laughter filling the room. "Joseph, I can't believe it. You did it," she exclaimed. Her eyes sparkled with pride. So, I thought. Jack clapped me on the back, his smile warm, encouraging. But sometimes, I think I should have noticed the flicker, just a flicker behind his eyes. Something I couldn't name then, something that would haunt me for years. For months, we had worked side by side, Jack and I, building something from nothing. Sleepless nights, endless pitches, investor calls that drained the soul. I trusted him more than anyone. He wasn't just my business partner, he was family, or so I thought. Victoria, on the other hand, became more involved in our world. She started joining meetings, offering ideas, charming everyone with her intelligence. I loved that she believed in me, that she wanted to be part of our dreams. But that dream, it was fragile. Fragile enough for cracks to appear when greed whispers softly into the ear of someone you trust. The first warning came subtly. A missed call from Jack, an evasive text, a casual remark that didn't sit right. I shrugged it off. I was too busy, too consumed with the excitement of our upcoming launch. I didn't see the storm quietly gathering behind my back. Then came the day it all fell apart. The day I realized that someone I trusted with my life, with my dreams, had decided to rewrite the story without me. I'll never forget walking into the office that morning, papers scattered across the conference table. My name nowhere to be found on the project we had spent months creating. Jack was there, smiling, but it wasn't the smile of my friend. It was the smile of someone who had just claimed a prize meant for two. And Victoria. She wasn't smiling at me. She was smiling at him. It felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. My heart sank, my chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. Betrayal has a way of turning your world upside down in an instant, and mine had been destroyed by the two people I loved the most. That's when I knew I couldn't fight back yet. I couldn't even think straight. But I vowed, silently, that I would rise from this. And when the time came, I would make sure that they realized exactly what they had lost and who they had betrayed. This was just the beginning. The days after I found the office empty of my name felt like being underwater. Everything moved in slow, muffled waves. People I'd known for years looked at me as if I were a stranger. Investors started calling Jack, asking questions meant for me. Emails were redirected. My phone, once full of plans and excitement, went silent more often than not. At first, I tried to reason with them all. I walked into meetings and spoke in the same voice I always used. I showed contracts. I showed messages. I showed the proof of the late nights, the code I had written, the pitch decks I had designed. But there's a moment betrayal becomes a story people prefer to believe because it's cleaner. The truth can be messy, and messy truths are easy for those in power to bury. Jack played his part perfectly, polished, confident, with a smile that made him look like the natural leader. He thanked me for the early days, called me the original spark, then placed a polite distance between us. Victoria watched from the side. Sometimes she would touch my arm lightly, like she still cared just enough to confuse me, never enough to comfort me. Bella was the only one who believed me immediately. She came over the night I couldn't sleep and let me rant and cry, and rehearse the words I would say to Jack. She listened without interrupting, then gave me a look I'll never forget. "You have two choices," she said simply. "You can beg, or you can plan." Begging didn't suit me. I thought of my father, Jackson, how he used to say, "Pride doesn't mean you never fall. It means you get up on your own terms." Gianna nodded along whenever he said it. I could hear his voice in my head like a lamp in the dark, steady and warm. I decided I would get up. But first I needed to understand what I was up against. I started small. Late nights at the cafe, old email chains, memory backups, anything that proved the work I'd poured into our company. I dug into the servers, pulling timestamps, commit logs, message threads. The deeper I went, the more things began to point to a pattern. It wasn't just Jack taking control. Someone within my closest circle had been shaping decisions, steering investors, and pushing narratives for months. Maria's name surfaced again and again, quietly copied on messages, guiding introductions, smoothing conversations. She wasn't obvious. She was polished, discreet. If Jack was the face, Maria was the hand that arranged the stage. The thought that Victoria might be connected to them was a pain I would not let myself feel fully yet. I wanted proof before I burned the last good part of her memory. Then there were the small betrayals that hurt more than the big ones. One, my half-brother started avoiding me. He used to call me for coffee and tell me jokes that made me laugh so hard my chest hurt. Now his text messages were short, businesslike. He had always loved the family home, that old stubborn house where our father kept his old watches and Gianna left flowers on the windowsill. It hurt to think he might be choosing distance over loyalty. I confronted Juan one evening. We met under the yellow light of a diner. He looked older, like life had sharpened his face, and his eyes moved like someone hiding small, guilty things. "Are you with them?" I asked. Simple, direct. It was the only way to cut the tension. He looked at me for a long time. "I don't want to be involved, Joe. It's bigger than you think. I helped build what we had. You grew up knowing that. Are you telling me you'd step back when it matters most?" He swallowed hard. "I'm protecting myself. I can't afford to lose everything because of old loyalties." The answer hit like cold rain. Protecting yourself is the same as abandoning another when they fall. I didn't judge him then. Fear can make people choose silence. But I wrote it down in my mind like a ledger. People who stood with me, people who walked away, and people who lied halfway in between. The more I gathered facts, the clearer the picture became. Jack had been courting investors in private. He'd offered Victoria something she needed: status, security, perhaps a way out of a life she never wanted. Maria smoothed the edges and handled the paperwork that made those offers look clean. It wasn't just greed, it was careful, cold calculation. I decided to play a different game. If they had a team, I would quietly build mine. Bella became my confidant, the one who reminded me to breathe. She worked in PR, knew people, and had a stubborn streak that matched mine. Alina, a quiet but fierce lawyer I once helped with a small favor, offered to look at contracts discreetly. She had debt to worry about and a loyalty to the truth. We formed a small, careful circle, 3 people, with reasons to set things right. I didn't want to rush. Revenge, I learned, is not a sprint. It's a long, careful climb. You need patience, timing, and a clean plan. The goal wasn't to destroy for the sake of it. It was to expose, to ensure that justice spoke louder than excuses, and that every person who had built a life on lies would face the day they could no longer hide. So I prepared. I fixed the parts of me that were broken, learned to sleep again, forced myself to eat, to call my parents and sit with them without showing all the wounds. I trained my mind to be steely. I pried open small doors, old investors who remembered our first pitch, mentors who still believed in the original idea, and one journalist who loved a good underdog story. They all had small roles to play later. For now, I collected evidence quietly, like a gardener saving seeds for the right season. I knew the harvest would be slow, but I also knew that nature rewards patience. Night after night, I rehearsed the questions I would ask Jack and Victoria when the time came, but I kept those rehearsals silent. I didn't want to give away my anger in a way that would burn the show before the curtain rose. This was not about breaking them at their knees. It was about shining a light so bright that everyone could see the dirt that had been gathered in the corners. And when that light came, I wanted it to be blinding. You learn something about people when you see how they react to pressure. Jack handled it by spinning charm into armor. He made public appearances and did interviews where he spoke of teamwork and new directions. Victoria posted pictures, gala gowns, warm smiles, expensive dinners that painted a life she had now fully embraced. But underneath the polished image, I found fissures. Ego makes people careless. Pride makes them think they're untouchable. And arrogance turns small mistakes into the kind of openings a patient person can use. My plan was simple in structure, but demanding in execution. Gather undeniable proof, expose the truth in the right places, and reclaim at least the truth of who I was. I did not want to steal back the company. I wanted my name restored, my story told. Step 1, documentation. Elena worked through contracts and found signatures that had been forged or backdated. She unearthed emails where Jack had removed my name from founder documents and replaced it with vague language that pushed me to the side. Those emails were the first seeds of the truth. Step 2. Witnesses. There were interns and former contractors who remembered my late nights, my corrections, my ideas scrawled on napkins. Bella reached out to them quietly. One by one, they agreed to talk some to me, some to people who would listen if I needed a public voice. Step 3. Pressure points. Investors hate risk. I began making quiet calls to a few key investors who had been pushed to Jack. I didn't threaten. I simply presented facts, asked questions that wound like a slow, steady hand. Some investors responded with caution, others with anger when they realized how they had been manipulated. Step 4. The story had to be simple and human. People connect with the person, not the spreadsheet. I wrote my own account, short, clear, full of feeling, and kept it ready. Timing would be everything. I moved slowly, deliberately. For months, I built a mountain of small things that, when combined, would be impossible to dismiss. A forged signature here, a witness there, a bank transfer that didn't align with the timeline. Little threads that, when pulled together, would unravel the whole garment. But plans have holes. There were nights when doubt leaked in, when the fear of being exposed as bitter or insane felt very real. Bella would rub my back steady as a lighthouse. "We don't do it for anger," she said. "We do it for truth." Alina found a particularly damaging email thread that proved Jack had been planning to cut me out from the beginning. It was not just opportunism. It was a premeditated betrayal, dressed in business terms, she told me, and I felt cold and hot at once. The kind of anger that is sharp and useful, it focuses you. The kind that motivates rather than destroys. I also knew I had to be careful with Victoria. She was, after all, someone I loved. If she was only a pawn, if Jack had convinced her with lies and promises, I needed to give her a way to step back without being destroyed. People who survive betrayals often do so because someone gave them an out. If she refused the out, the consequences would be on her. So I wrote her a letter, one I never intended to send at first. I wrote everything I felt, clearly and simply. It was a test for me, as much as it was for her. If the letter ever reached the world, it would be very messy. But it clarified my own truth. I had been betrayed, and I was taking back my life. Then, slowly, the openings came. Jack grew careless in the small ways I had learned to watch. He boasted a little too loudly at the wrong dinner. He used the wrong phrase in an email that Alina had highlighted as inconsistent with past language. Maria made a small error with a vendor that produced a paper trail. It was not dramatic, but it was enough. The first domino fell when an investor called Jack into a private meeting and asked for clarification about the founder documents. Jack fumbled. He hesitated. In those tiny seconds of doubt, I felt the world tilt. People who build power on shaky ground tend to tremble under scrutiny. We set a date to reveal not a public bullhorn, reveal this was not a television stunt. It was a set of quiet exposures, an email shared with key people, a meeting with the board where the truth was presented calmly and with facts, and a prepared personal account placed with a journalist who respected truth over sensationalism. I remember the night before we moved. Bella and Alina and I sat in my cramped kitchen, papers spread like a map of war. We were not soldiers. We were ordinary people trying to correct an extraordinary wrong. The gravity of what we planned was heavy, but hope was heavier. "You ready?" Bella asked, looking at me with those clear eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. I nodded. "Ready?" There's something sacred about getting ready for a fight that is not about fists, but about truth. It clears your head. It organizes your fear into a tool. The next morning, I walked into the building where it all began. The elevator felt longer than usual. On the way up, I rehearsed what I would say in the meeting. Short, clear, fact-driven, without the venom I felt. My goal was to show who I was. Not to humiliate, but to be seen as the man I had been. When I opened the conference room door, Jack looked at me with a smile that faltered the moment I set the folder on the table. Alina sat to my right. Bella stood in the doorway. A few board members took their seats, their faces suddenly attentive. I began to speak. The first few minutes were the hardest, speaking my truth to people who had let lies stand. But as the facts unfolded, you could see the change. The room shifted from routine politeness to tight attention. The document spoke in a language that couldn't be smoothed over with charm. Jack tried the old tactics deflection charm, denials, but the paper was louder than his voice. Maria looked like someone watching a ship sink slowly, and Victoria's face was a stone I couldn't read. For a moment, I felt hope that perhaps the truth would be enough. It was not the end yet, but it was a crack, and cracks widen. Exposing the truth is a strange thing. It doesn't always feel like victory right away. Sometimes it feels quieter, like a small bell rung in a big, empty hall. The sound travels and changes, but you must wait to hear who answers. The immediate fallout was messy. Some board members admitted they had been misled. A few investors wanted to pause and examine everything. Jack's public sheen dulled in conversations I overheard in the lobby. Maria's calm seemed to fray at the edges, but people are complicated. Some had built their own stakes around Jack's leadership. Those people lashed back. They painted my move as petty, emotionally driven. They paid for articles that suggested I was bitter, an ex-founder, unable to accept progress. For every person who stepped back from Jack, there seemed to be another ready to defend him for the sake of stability. Victoria's position became unbearable. She told me later, when everything had already changed, that she had been promised a life she feared losing. She whispered that she never wanted to hurt me, that she had been convinced what she did was love something, safe wrapped in lies. Those words hurt because part of me wanted to believe them, but she had chosen, and choices have consequences. There were small victories that kept me moving forward. An investor withdrew funding from Jack's plans until a full audit was completed. An old collaborator publicly thanked me for my early work in a message that circled the right places. Alina found more irregularities that made it impossible for the board to ignore the legal implications. And there were losses. Friends who I thought would understand kept their distance. Juan distanced himself, claiming neutrality. The press framed me with questions about bitterness rather than integrity. I heard my own name paired with adjectives I didn't recognize. It's funny how the truth can be presented as a problem for the person who speaks it. The hardest part was watching Victoria. She vacillated between regret and defiance. One evening, I found her on the rooftop of our old building, the city lights like fireflies scattered below. She looked small, the way people look when they realize a mask can no longer be worn. "Joseph," she said, "simple. No excuses. No pleas." "I didn't do this for you," I said. That sounded cold, harsher than I meant. The truth was I had done it for myself, to stand upright again, to be seen. She looked at me as if measuring distance. She started, then stopped. What she needed was forgiveness, or punishment, something to close the loop. I had neither to give. I had to keep walking. In the weeks that followed, accountability began to creep in. Contracts were reshuffled. Jack was removed from certain leadership roles pending investigation. Maria's influence dwindled. But the world does not always make neat endings. People who hurt you sometimes get to keep a piece of life that once belonged to you. That is the bitter part of truth. The media did what media do. They preferred angles that created drama rather than nuance. But a reputable journalist published a clean piece that focused on evidence and let readers draw their own conclusions. That article reached the right desks. People began to ask questions that could not be answered by charm alone. And then, a week after the big meeting, I got a call that felt like a bell tolling. Joseph Alina said on the phone, "We have enough to force a full audit. The board wants to meet." It was the sound of forward motion. It was not yet justice, but it was a step. That night, back at my apartment, I allowed myself a small celebration with Bella. We ordered cheap pizza, drank too much coffee, and laughed the kind of laugh that comes after crying. There's power in small moments. You remember them because they are real, not polished for anyone else. But in the quiet after midnight, I sat alone and thought about the cost. We had exposed lies. We had taken back pieces of truth. But in that process, some parts of my life were still broken. Trust, once shattered, doesn't glue back together easily. I had to accept that reconciliation might not come, and that sometimes the end of a story is not what you want, but what you need. I learned something important then. Revenge that is only about making someone suffer is hollow. Revenge that is about restoring balance, about making truth public, can be redemptive. It gives you back a life anchored in honesty. Yet even as I felt the tide turning, I knew the hardest part was ahead. Jack would not give ground without a fight. He had resources, allies, and a hunger born of entitlement. He would try to twist narratives, to hide behind legal language, to use fear and money as shields. And Victoria, what would she do now that the house of cards was wobbling? Would she stand and face the consequences, or would she flee into a new life built on others' forgiveness? I didn't know. I only knew I had to prepare for whatever came next. I had arrangements to make, plans to strengthen, and a life to rebuild once the dust finally settled. The war, I realized, was not only in boardrooms and courtrooms. It was inside me. It was the battle to become someone better than the man who had been so easily broken. And sometimes that battle is the hardest to win. They told me revenge was a dark thing. They warned that it consumes you, that you become someone you no longer recognize. I understood the warning, but I had learned something else. Revenge, when guided by truth and patience, can be a precise instrument. It can correct an injustice without destroying the soul that wields it. After the board meeting and the small victories, we tightened the plan. No theatrics. No wild accusations in public. The goal was to remove the safety nets Jack and his allies had built. The stories paid for by charm. The forged documents, the silent payments into off-books accounts. We would do that by controlling the information flow, by turning every lie into a fact that could be checked, and by making sure those facts reached the right ears. Bella became my operations center. Where I had ideas and anger, she had details and a stubborn knack for people. She coordinated witness statements, lined up the interns who remembered late nights and empty coffee cups, and compiled a timeline so clean even the most loyal Jack fan couldn't ignore it. Alina continued to work the legal edges. She was calm and methodical, the kind of person who read contracts like a person reads a favorite book. Every page mattered. But the most powerful weapon we had was something simple: credibility. I had been the face of that early struggle. I had pitched in smoky rooms, slept on office couches, coded until my eyes blurred. People remembered that. So when the narrative started to tilt, an old mentor sent a message, then another, and people who mattered began to ask questions. Was Joseph really out? Did he really step away? Did Jack actually lead that part? We used those questions like doors. Once they were open, Alina pushed a legal file through and quietly requested an audit. Not headline grabbing, quiet, precise. The auditors started to look for the inconsistencies we had found. I watched their reports arrive like a trail of breadcrumbs. Jack reacted in predictable ways: anger, blame, then attempts at damage control. He held a press dinner and smiled for cameras, but the surface had been scratched. At that dinner, he made the mistake of celebrating too loudly. He joked about rivals and mentioned an investor by name in a way that made the investor uncomfortable. That tiny slip gave Alina something to follow, and she found transactions that didn't align with official minutes. The holes in Jack's story weren't just about greed, they were about sloppy arrogance. I also turned to human stories. Facts build the case. Stories move people. I wrote a short piece, a simple, honest account of those first nights, the struggles, the small victories. Nothing sensational, just the truth. I gave it to a journalist who believed in fairness and had a reputation for balanced reporting. She agreed to sit with me privately to hear everything without the cameras. Her questions were kind but probing, and when she left, I felt the weight of truth finally being folded into something readable. Meanwhile, I didn't forget Victoria. If she had been a willing conspirator, she would face it. If she had been misled, she deserved a chance to step back without being crushed. So I set an option. A private conversation, mediated by Alina, where she could tell her side, return evidence if she had it, and make amends. It was not mercy in the soft sense. It was an offer of dignity in the middle of a mess. Her response surprised me. She accepted the meeting. Her hands shook when she sat down, and for the first time in months, I felt something soften in me. She spoke of promises and fear, of being told she was helping our future, and of not wanting to lose the life she'd imagined. She did not give me all the answers. She did not return everything. But she did give me the truth that, in part, she had believed what Jack told her. Whether that belief was naive or complicit mattered less than the fact that she was, in that room, human again. I offered her a path that would not erase pain, but would allow her to make choices that matched the person I remembered loving. Tell the truth, I said quietly. Help make it right. She nodded, and that small nod felt like hope. For me, hope is not a feeling that everything will be easy. It's the belief that something honest can still be done. Outside of the private talks, our plan continued. We leaked certain documents to the right people, not to destroy, but to make sure the timeline corresponded with reality. A vendor's invoice, a backdated file, an email thread with signatures out of order. Each item was a brick in a path that led to reality. Jack tried to push back. He hired PR, whispered doubters into ears, and even tried to sway a couple of board members with promises of quick returns. But every time he moved, Elena had a calm answer. Every whisper was met with a document or a witness. The more he attacked, the more his defenses revealed their seams. One evening, Jack set a trap. He publicly accused me of trying to sabotage his funding round. It was a cheap shot meant to make me look like a saboteur. I could have exploded. Instead, I sent him a short statement, factual, restrained, and then left the rest to the process. Public fury can look dramatic, but it's messy and unreliable. I wanted law and evidence, not spectacle. As the audit advanced, something else happened that surprised me. People I hadn't expected to stand with me began to appear. An old investor reached out and said, "I remember the night you stayed to debug the system while the rest went home." A contractor I'd helped years ago sent a short note confirming work logs. These small testimonies knit together into a net that made Jack feel exposed and increasingly frantic. Maria, who had quietly smoothed over many of Jack's moves, started to crumble under her own caution. A vendor notified Elena about a hush payment that had never cleared properly, and suddenly Maria's calm vanished. She stopped answering messages. Her presence in meetings became a flicker. People who had once deferred to her began to ask awkward questions, but with each small victory came a cost. The pressure weighed on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Old wounds reopened. The nights were long, and sometimes I woke to the memory of Victoria's laugh, to the image of Jack in our old office, and to the knowledge that people I once loved had chosen a different path. It would have been easy to let rage steer me, to seek destruction. Instead, I kept steering toward correction. I wanted the truth to remain the center. The plan culminated in a quiet morning that felt larger than any speech. The board meeting where the audit results were presented had no audience. It was a room of people with legal papers and nervous glances. Elena walked them through pages of evidence. Witnesses corroborated timelines, and the auditor's report matched our documents line for line. One by one, board members shifted. The eyes that once looked at Jack with unquestioned faith now searched for firm ground. He defended, he pleaded, he tried to charm, but charm is thin when paper and witnesses press on it. When the meeting ended, Jack was removed from his leadership position pending further investigation, and an independent review was ordered. It wasn't a full victory. It wasn't the triumphant headline I had once imagined in my darker dreams. It was cleaner and more important. The truth had been put into an official record. That record could not be smoothed away with a smile. As they escorted him out of leadership, I saw Jack glance at me. His face was not the warm face of my friend. It was the face of a man who had finally understood the cost of his choices. There was regret there, maybe, or maybe just anger. I couldn't tell. What I did feel was a lightness, like an attic door finally opened and the stale air was replaced by something clear. But I also felt something else, a small, cold fear. Jack had lost a position, but he still had people who loved the version of him he had created. He still had pride. Pride can be a more dangerous weapon than wealth. It can make a person fight until everything burns. So while we had turned many tables, I knew the real test was still ahead. Turning the table is one thing. Making sure the table never collapses again is another. I had what I needed to restore my name, but I also had to face the fact that some bridges could not be rebuilt. That evening, as I walked home under a sky that felt both heavy and clean, Bella called and said, "Tomorrow, they will try something new. He won't go quietly." Her voice was calm, but firm. I closed my eyes and breathed in the city air. The battle lines had shifted, but the war was not yet over. I had won a major move, but the end game, the part where truth and consequence met fully, still waited. "Okay," I said into the phone, feeling the stone of resolve settle in my chest. "Tell me when." "I'll be ready." The next move would test everything. My patience again. And the hard lesson that justice sometimes requires more than facts. It requires courage to see it through. They say truth has a weight.